Hi everyone, my name is Qingxia. Today I'm presenting on behalf of Nathaniel, Imel, Steinert-Threlkeld, as well as Climber Lab and UW-NLP. And my topic is an introduction to a database for modal semantic typology. So here are some of the material that I'm going to cover today. I'll start with the definition of modals and what semantic meaning do modal represent. And I'll show some examples of that in natural languages. Then I'm going to introduce our database and tell you about what does it do. It is an open source database, so do consider this talk as an invitation to contribute. Then I'm going to talk about how we have been collecting data and details on how to contribute specifically. And just to put this under a greater context, I'm gonna show two use cases of this database. And finally, I'll wrap this up with some reflections and possible future works. So, what are modals? Semanticists refer the term modal as an ability to talk about possible worlds. A typical example would be must in English. Kreiser has actually broken down the meaning of modals into two axes, force and flavor. Force would essentially be quantifiers over possible worlds and will have values such as strong, weak, etc. Since it's a quantifier, sometimes people use universal versus existential or necessity versus possibility. Noted those terms are basically equivalent to each other. And flavors are properties that define the set of possible worlds and could have values such as epistemic, which means set of possible worlds based on speaker's knowledge of, or deontic, which means set of possible worlds where speaker abide their obligation, and more so. So to put these under the context of English, say a friend walks in and shakes off a wet umbrella. Now, based on your knowledge of the current situation, you said it must be raining outside. Here the word must represents a situation where among all the possible worlds that you acquire this piece of information, it is true that it is raining outside. Noted the two axes show up where strong comes from quantifier all over possible worlds and epistemic comes from the nature of possible worlds. Another example would be number 4. Say a mother offers a treat to a child for finishing an assignment, saying, "You may have a cookie." Then it is true that there exist some possible worlds such that the child would abide his or her obligation of doing assignment. Then the child had a cookie. So similarly, the weak force comes from the existential quantifier over possible worlds, and deontic comes from the child following the obligation. From this table, we can also see that English is ambiguous between flavors, but not force. Must can represent both deontic and epistemic flavor, as in 1 and 2, but not both weak and strong. But it is not the case that every language is ambiguous between weak and strong. So here's a counterexample. In Salish, the expression ka is the modal in Salish, and you can see here the context is strong epistemic and weak epistemic. So Salish actually used the same expression for both weak and strong epistemic. So the different mapping strategies of English and Salish has actually made us curious and start initiating this database. Ideally, we would like to derive a full paradigm of modal expression with force-flavor pair and can express value in natural languages, and so that we can acquire a mini representation of modals. So start with a simple example, the expression may. We have from the previous context, we have established these can express value with force flavor pair, and then we can transfer that into this meaning representation. And if we can just ignore the C and T here, so and the E and D actually represent the epistemic and deontic. So we would like to extend these to more languages that we could find source of and every expressions in that languages. And here is our end product of our database. By the end, we're able to add 17 languages in total. 5 are from targeted semantics fieldwork, and 12 are just from generic reference grammar. And here's the GitHub URL for the database. So here are some details about our data format. Raw format is designed to be very simple and straightforward so that people can contribute with no cost. Basically, you just store the core information that I've just talked about, such as expressions, force and flavor pair, can express value for each languages in modals.csv, and information about the language you're contributing in metadata.yml. Since we're building a database for typology study, we would like to convert the raw format to a cross-linguistic dataset format. The CLDF format can later be consumed by tools to develop interactive web applications. And here is a very simple user guideline to contribution. Obviously, you can find more details in the contributing.markdown in the URL. It follows a very simple fork and pull mechanism where you fork the GitHub repo, you create the language folder, you added the required file that I just described to the folder, you added the source bib, and you create the pull request. So right now, we know how to contribute to the database. So what are the ways of actually collecting the data? So far, we have established 2 directions on data collection. First would be just research descriptive sources. So there are targeted semantics fieldwork on this subject, such as the Salish, the examples that we have seen previously. Also, field linguists are really helpful in this genre. They have written many reference grammar, which also sometimes would have a dedicated modal section that we could take advantage of. However, sometimes descriptive source has its own limitation, especially with reference grammar. Sometimes we don't have the negative evidence or the context from the reference grammar is not very clear. So it is better for us just to do the elicitation directly. And we're lucky that VendorClock actually has provided a questionnaire with context so that we can consult with the native speaker directly. Actually, Professor Uegaki from University of Edinburgh is producing these type of results with native speaker right now. And another way of elicitation would be crowdsourcing. And this is more applicable to dominant languages. One thing that is worth noting is elicitation methods can be very dynamic. There isn't one way or the other. Usually both methods can be employed in practice. The process can go first consult with small numbers of native speakers and obtain what kind of modal expressions are out there. And then we can use crowdsourcing method to verify and have negative examples. So now we finished talking about the dataset. What are some use cases? So the other 2 authors of this paper, Nathaniel and Shane, actually did an efficient communication analysis on artificial languages of modals, and they found out naturalness significantly correlated to the optimality. So the question now is, what about actual natural languages? And they reproduced a similar analysis on 5 of the natural languages, and here are the results in the red cross here. And we can see 4 out of 5 natural languages are very close to the optimality frontier here. Another use case is a principle that we developed called IF, which stands for independence of force and flavor. It means if a modal can express a force-flavor pair, say strong deontic and weak epistemic, then it could express any combination of strong, weak, epistemic, deontic. And we also provide a simple tool to check whether this property holds for the languages in the database. So just to wrap up, we introduce a database on modal typology. We collect the data in various formats and from various sources, and also I discussed 2 use cases of this database. Some future work and possible direction includes data visualization using CLDF format, extending our database not only from descriptive sources, also from semantic elicitation methods, and also syntactic information about modal expression could also be helpful for future research. Thank you so much for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.